The old man's hands trembled slightly as he lifted the coffee cup to his lips. At 88, Ethan Cross had seen more sunrises than most men could count, but the one he was about to describe to his grandson had changed everything. "Grandpa," Daniel said, settling into the chair beside him on the porch. The young man had just returned from Korea 3 months ago, and Ethan could see the same emptiness in his eyes that he'd once seen in his own mirror. "Mr. Johnson down at the general store said you were once protected by the Apache. Is that true?" Ethan was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting across the property that had been his home for 80 years. The land had changed. Modern fences replaced the rough mesquite posts he'd once hammered into the hard Arizona earth. A pickup truck sat where his horses Thunder and Whisper once grazed. But if he closed his eyes, he could still hear the sound that had awakened him on that August morning in 1876. The thunder of 150 horses moving as one. "It's true," Ethan said finally, "but that's not really the story, Daniel. The story is about how a dead man learned to live again." Daniel leaned forward, his coffee forgotten. "Dead? What do you mean?" 3 years before that morning, your great-grandmother Sarah died in my arms. And when she went, she took most of me with her. I became what folks call a ghost. A man going through the motions of living without actually being alive. I stayed that way until one evening in August, when two strangers appeared at my door. One of them was dying. Ethan's eyes grew distant, seeing not the modern Arizona of 1956, but the brutal frontier of 1876. "Let me tell you how it began." The landscape shimmered and shifted in his memory, and suddenly he was there again. 38 years old, with hands that still remembered how to heal, but a heart that had forgotten why it should bother. It was August 12th, 1876. The summer sun beat down on the Arizona territory with the kind of heat that made a man question why he'd ever left the shade. Ethan Cross stood at his fence line, post-hole digger in hand, working on a section that didn't really need fixing. But that was the thing about grief. It made you find work just to avoid thinking. He'd been out here since dawn. 5:30 in the morning, like clockwork. The Army had trained that into him during the war between the states, and even 12 years later, his body still obeyed. He'd wake, brew 2 cups of coffee out of habit, drink one, and leave the other sitting on the table where Sarah used to sit. He'd done this 1,095 mornings in a row now, 3 years exactly. The property stretched out before him. 160 acres of stubborn earth that fought him for every potato, every ear of corn. His cabin sat at the center, a structure of rough-hewn logs that he'd built with his own hands in 1873, right after Sarah passed. Building it had given him something to do besides scream at a God who didn't seem to be listening. 20 feet by 24 feet of loneliness. One room, one bed, one chair by the window where he'd sit for hours, watching the sun track across the sky, marking time until he could sleep again and temporarily escape the weight of being alive. 2 horses grazed in the small corral he'd built. Thunder, a Morgan stallion with a temperament as solid as his name suggested, and Whisper, a quarter-horse mare who'd carried Sarah on their last ride together. He kept them not because he needed 2 horses, but because getting rid of Whisper would have felt like erasing Sarah completely. The land around him was harsh and beautiful in the way that only the Arizona territory could be. Mesquite and Palo Verde trees dotted the landscape. In the distance, the Dragoon Mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks purple in the afternoon light. Copper Ridge, the nearest town, sat 8 miles to the south. Ethan hadn't been there in 3 months. People asked too many questions, offered too much sympathy. He preferred the company of silence. He was alone out here, and that was exactly how he wanted it. Or so he told himself every morning when he woke to an empty house and tried to convince himself that the ache in his chest was normal, that it would eventually fade, that he was fine. He wasn't fine. He was a 38-year-old man who looked 50. His beard had grown long and unkempt because he couldn't be bothered to trim it. His hair, once solidly brown, now showed streaks of gray that hadn't been there before Sarah died. His hands, though still steady when they needed to be, had the calluses of a man who worked himself into exhaustion every day just to quiet his mind. The fence didn't need fixing, but he fixed it anyway. He'd been at it for 4 hours when he straightened up, pressing a hand to his lower back. The sun was starting its descent toward the western horizon, 6:30, maybe 7. He should head back, tend to the horse, eat something, though the thought of food held about as much appeal as it usually did, which was to say, none at all. That's when he saw them. At first, they were just shapes in the distance, heat shimmer making them waver like mirages. 400 yards to the south, maybe a bit more. Two figures moving slowly across the open ground. One was supporting the other, practically carrying them. Ethan reached for the brass telescope he kept in his saddlebag. It was an old Union Army model, three-draw design, issued in 1864, and somehow still in his possession 12 years later. He extended it fully, brought it to his eye, and adjusted the focus. Two women, Apache, from their clothing. Traditional buckskin dresses, though both were torn and dust-covered. The one being supported was barely conscious, her feet dragging with every step. The other one, the stronger one, had her arm wrapped around her companion's waist, taking almost all of her weight. Even from this distance, Ethan could see they were in trouble. The way the stronger woman kept looking around, the desperate quality to her movements, the fact that they were out here at all. Apache didn't usually travel in pairs like this, not in territory this close to settler homesteads. And the way the weaker one moved, or rather failed to move properly, suggested illness or injury. Ethan lowered the telescope. His first instinct, the one trained into him by 3 years of deliberate isolation, was to look away. This wasn't his business. This was exactly the kind of situation that smart men avoided. The territory was tense, had been for months. Settlers and Apache tribes were locked in an uneasy standoff, each side wary of the other, each side with plenty of reasons to be wary. Getting involved would be dangerous, possibly fatal. The smart move was to pack up his tools, ride back to the cabin, and pretend he hadn't seen anything. He raised the telescope again. The weaker woman stumbled. Her companion struggled to keep her upright. For just a moment, the failing evening light caught the weaker woman's face, and Ethan saw it clearly. Fever-bright eyes, skin flushed red, the particular kind of stumble that came not from exhaustion, but from delirium. And just like that, he was back in his cabin 3 years ago. Sarah was lying in their bed, her skin hot enough to burn his hand when he touched her forehead. Her eyes had that same glassy look. Her breathing had that same shallow, rapid quality. I can't help her, he told himself then, over and over, even as he tried everything he knew. Every remedy from his time as a Union Army medic, cold compresses, willow bark tea for the fever, quinine from his dwindling supply. Nothing had worked. He'd watched her slip away over 6 days, helpless despite all of his training, despite all his knowledge, despite every prayer he'd sent up to a heaven that seemed to have better things to do than answer him. He'd failed her. He'd been a medic, supposedly trained to save lives, and he couldn't save the one life that mattered most. The Apache woman stumbled again. This time she went down, taking her companion with her. Ethan stood at his fence line, post-hole digger in one hand, telescope in the other, and fought a war with himself. Logic said walk away. The heart he'd thought was dead said otherwise. Later, much later, when he was an old man telling this story to his grandson, he would say that he didn't really make a conscious decision. His feet just started moving. One step, then another, until he was walking across the open ground toward two strangers who had every reason to kill him and no reason to trust him. He left his tools by the fence. He left his horse ground-tied near the fence line. He walked with his hands visible and empty at his sides. No weapon, no threat. Just a man walking toward two people who needed help. 300 yards. 250. 200. The stronger woman saw him. She moved fast, with the kind of speed that came from a lifetime of needing to react or die. She pushed her companion behind her and pulled a knife from somewhere at her waist. Even from 100 yards away, Ethan could see the blade catch the dying light. 6 inches of steel, probably carbon steel, kept sharp enough to shave with. Ethan stopped, raised both hands, palms open. Universal language. No weapon, no threat. The woman didn't lower the knife. Why would she? He was a white man, and white men had given her people plenty of reasons not to trust them. Behind her, the weaker woman collapsed completely, just folded up like a puppet with its strings cut. The stronger woman had to turn, had to choose between watching the threat or helping her companion. She chose her companion, but the knife stayed in her hand and her eyes stayed on Ethan. 100 yards. Ethan started walking again. Slow, steady, hands still up. 50 yards. He could see them clearly now. The stronger one was young, maybe 24. Dark eyes that held equal parts defiance and desperation. Black hair in a braid down her back. High cheekbones. A face that would have been beautiful if it wasn't currently set in an expression that promised violence. The weaker one was younger, maybe 21. Sisters, probably. The resemblance was there in the shape of their faces, the set of their eyes. But where the older sister radiated coiled tension, the younger one radiated nothing but heat. Even from yards away, Ethan could practically feel the fever rolling off her. 30 yards. "I'm a doctor," Ethan called out. He wasn't, not really. He was a medic. But the distinction didn't matter much out here. "I can help." The older sister said something sharp in Apache. Ethan didn't understand the words. But he understood the tone. It said, "Stay back." It said, "I will kill you." It said, "I don't believe you." 20 yards. The younger sister's eyes were half closed, unfocused. Her breathing was fast and shallow. Her skin had that particular flush that Ethan had learned to recognize during the war. High fever, dangerous fever, the kind that killed if you didn't get it under control fast. He'd seen enough men die of fever to know the signs. Typhoid, malaria, dysentery, any number of diseases that thrived in the heat and killed with methodical efficiency. This girl had hours, maybe less. 15 yards. Ethan stopped again. Slowly, carefully, he knelt down, made himself smaller, less threatening. He pointed toward his cabin, visible in the distance. Then he made gestures. Drinking water, lying down to sleep, shelter. The older sister's knuckles were white on the knife handle. She was calculating. Ethan could see it in her eyes, weighing the danger of trusting him against the certainty of what would happen if she didn't. Her sister moaned, a low, pain-filled sound that seemed to make the decision for her. She spoke. Her English was heavily accented, but clear enough. "You try hurt us, I kill you." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, a statement of fact. "Understood," Ethan said. She lowered the knife. Not all the way, not anywhere close to all the way, but enough. Ethan stood slowly and approached the younger sister. Up close, she was worse than he'd thought. Temperature had to be at least 104. Pulse rapid and thready when he checked her wrist. Skin dry despite the heat, which was a bad sign. Dehydration. Severe. I'm gonna carry her," he said to the older sister. "It's faster than trying to walk her." The older sister nodded once, sharp and reluctant. The knife stayed in her hand. Ethan got the younger woman into a fireman's carry, a technique the Army had drilled into every medic. Weight distributed across his shoulders, one arm securing her legs, the other securing her arms. She was light, too light, maybe 95 pounds, malnourished on top of everything else. He started walking toward the cabin. The older sister fell in behind him, about 5 feet back, close enough to intervene if he tried anything. Far enough to have reaction time. Smart. The younger sister was mumbling in her delirium. "Ima," she kept saying. "Ima." Mother, even Ethan knew that word. She was calling for her mother. The walk back took 20 minutes. The sun set as they walked, the sky turning from blue to orange to purple to black. The temperature dropped fast the way it did in the desert. 95 degrees at sunset, 75 by the time they reached the cabin. Coyotes started their evening chorus in the distance. The sound made the older sister tense, her hand tightening on the knife. But Ethan kept walking, steady and calm, the weight of the dying girl on his shoulders a burden he had chosen to carry. When they reached the cabin, he pushed the door open with his shoulder. The older sister hesitated at the threshold. Ethan didn't blame her. Walking into a white man's home, alone, vulnerable, every instinct probably screaming at her to run. But her sister moaned again, and she stepped inside. Ethan lit the oil lamp on the table. Warm yellow light filled the single room. The older sister's eyes went immediately to the rifle mounted above the door, then to the knife on the kitchen table, then to the bed against the far wall, then to the photograph on the wall. It was a daguerreotype of Sarah, 1870. She'd been 30 then, smiling at the camera with the particular stiffness that came from having to hold still for the long exposure time. But her eyes were alive, happy, the way Ethan remembered her before the fever. The older sister stared at the photograph for a long moment. Then she looked at the bed. Bed, one person's bed, she understood. This man had been married. His wife was gone now. He lived alone. My wife, Ethan said quietly. She died 3 years ago. The older sister's expression shifted, not to sympathy exactly, but to something, recognition maybe, understanding that he knew something about loss. Ethan carried the younger sister to the bed. He laid her down on sheets he'd washed 2 days ago, sheets that smelled of lye soap and sun. The older sister started to protest, gesturing that they shouldn't take his bed. But Ethan was already pulling back the covers, already positioning pillows. "I'll sit in the chair," he said. "It's fine." He went to work the way he'd been trained. First, assess the patient. He placed his hand on the younger sister's forehead. Burning hot. Pulled back an eyelid. Pupils responsive but sluggish. Checked her pulse again. Still fast, still weak. Checked her skin for rash. Found a faint one on her torso. Could be typhoid. Could be a dozen other things. He grabbed his medical kit from under the bed. It was a relic from the war, battered leather case with brass fittings. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were the tools of his old trade. Thermometer, scalpel, forceps, sutures, and most importantly, a small brown bottle labeled quinine sulfate. He shook out a thermometer, an expensive mercury model that he'd somehow managed not to break in 13 years. Placed it under the younger sister's tongue. Waited. The older sister watched everything. Her hand never left the knife handle. Her eyes tracked every movement he made, cataloging, assessing, building a case in her mind about what kind of man he was. The thermometer read 104.6 degrees. Dangerous, not immediately fatal, but heading that direction. Ethan went to the well out back, pulled up a bucket of cold water. The well was 40 feet deep, and the water down there stayed cold even in August. He soaked clean cloths in it, wrung them out, and brought them inside. The older sister had pulled a chair next to the bed and was holding her sister's hand. She looked up when Ethan entered, and for just a second her guard dropped. He saw real fear there, the fear of someone watching someone they love slip away. "What's her name?" Ethan asked. The older sister hesitated, then said, "Kiona." "I'm going to cool her down," Ethan said. "Bring the fever down. Then I'll give her medicine." The older sister nodded. Ethan placed the cold compresses on Kiona's forehead, neck, and wrists, the major arteries. "Cool the blood there, you cool the whole body." Basic medicine, but effective. He changed the compresses every 3 minutes, keeping them cold. While he worked, the older sister spoke. Her English was broken, but he got the gist. They'd been gathering plans for medicine. Kiona had been sick for 2 days, but insisted on coming. She collapsed on the way back. They were 40 miles from their camp, too far to make it. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. "Dakota," she said. "I'm Ethan." She didn't respond. Names didn't matter. Only results mattered. An hour passed, then 2. Ethan worked steadily, methodically, changed the compresses, checked the temperature. Watched the breathing. It was familiar work, the kind that his hands remembered even if his heart had tried to forget. At midnight, Kiona's temperature had dropped to 103. Better, but not good enough. Ethan prepared a dose of quinine, 10 grains, about 650 milligrams, dissolved in sugar water to mask the bitter taste. "This will help," he told Dakota, "but she has to swallow it." Together they lifted Kiona's head. Ethan held the glass to her lips. She was barely conscious, but instinct made her swallow. Once, twice, 3 times. She took the whole dose. Ethan set the glass aside and sat back in his chair. Dakota sat in hers. The cabin was quiet except for Kiona's breathing and the occasional creak of settling wood. "Why you help us?" Dakota asked suddenly. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. She was exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, dust in her hair, but she sat rigid in her chair, ready to fight if she needed to. My wife died of fever, he said simply. I couldn't save her. Maybe I can save your sister. Dakota was silent for a long moment. Then she said, You are different, not like other white men. I'm just tired, Ethan said. Tired of death, tired of losing. At 1 o'clock in the morning they heard it, distant at first, so faint that Ethan thought he might be imagining it. But Dakota heard it too. She went rigid, her hand flying to the knife. Horses, many horses, moving through the night. The sound grew steadily louder over the next hour. Not close yet, but getting closer. A lot of horses moving together, not a random group, something organized, something purposeful. Dakota stood and went to the window. Ethan joined her. They couldn't see anything in the darkness, but they could hear it. The rhythmic thunder of hooves, getting closer. My people, Dakota said quietly. They come for us. How many? Ethan asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Many, Dakota said. Father will bring many. Your father? Napaya, she said. The way she said the name carried weight, respect, and something else. Fear, maybe. He is chief. He is strong. He will think you hurt us. But I didn't. I know. Dakota looked at him, and for the first time, there was something other than suspicion in her eyes. But will he believe? Ethan didn't have an answer for that. At 3 o'clock, Kiona's fever spiked, 106 degrees. She started seizing. Small tremors at first, then full convulsions. Her back arched. Her eyes rolled back. Hold her down, Ethan shouted. Training kicked in. He'd seen this before. Febrile seizures, dangerous but manageable if you kept the patient from hurting themselves. Dakota helped him hold Kiona steady. The seizure lasted 30 seconds, though it felt like an hour. When it passed, Kiona went limp. Ethan grabbed the bucket of cold water he had been refreshing in all night. He'd been saving this ice from his cellar. He kept a small supply, blocks cut from the river in winter and stored in sawdust. He chipped off pieces, added them to the water, and soaked fresh cloths. This will be cold, he warned Dakota. Very cold. But we have to bring the fever down now or she'll die. Dakota nodded. Ethan placed the ice-cold compresses on Kiona's forehead, neck, armpits, and groin. The major cooling points. Kiona gasped at the cold but didn't wake. He kept the compresses there, changing them every 3 minutes, pushing her body temperature down by sheer force. 20 minutes later, the thermometer read 103.2. The immediate crisis had passed. Ethan sat back, breathing hard. His shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool night air. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the aftermath of adrenaline. The old familiar feeling from the war. The feeling of having just pulled someone back from the edge. He looked up and found Dakota staring at him. Her knife was on the table. She'd set it down at some point during the crisis and she hadn't picked it back up. You saved her, Dakota said quietly. Maybe, Ethan said. Still have to get through the night. But something had changed. Dakota was looking at him differently now. Not like a threat, not quite like a friend, but like something in between. At 5 o'clock, the sky began to lighten. The sound of horses had grown much closer. Ethan could tell they'd stopped moving somewhere just beyond the horizon, waiting for dawn, probably, waiting for enough light to see. Kiona stirred, her eyes fluttered open. They were clearer than they'd been hours ago. The fever had broken, not gone, but broken. She looked around, confused, then saw her sister. Dakota? Her voice was barely a whisper. Dakota leaned forward, tears running down her face, though she made no sound. She spoke rapidly in Apache, words tumbling over each other. Kiona listened, her eyes moving to Ethan. She studied him for a long moment. Then she said something to her sister. She say thank you, Dakota translated. She say you are good man. I just did what needed doing, Ethan said. She say, Dakota paused, struggling with the words. She say you have eyes like someone who knows loss, like someone who understands. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Father is outside, Dakota said quietly. He will come when sun rises. Will you tell him the truth? Ethan asked. That I helped? Yes, Dakota said. But I do not know if he believe. She struggled for words. White men killed our mother 7 winters ago. Father promised her he would not hate all white men, but it is hard promise to keep. Ethan absorbed that. He looked at the window. The sky was turning from black to gray. Dawn was maybe 20 minutes away. He could see shapes now, dark figures on horseback, arranged in a perfect circle around his property. Not 10, not 20, more than he could count. The math was simple and brutal. You didn't bring that many warriors unless you were prepared to deliver justice. Final justice. He looked at Kiona, sleeping peacefully now. At Dakota, sitting beside her. At the empty coffee cup that should have been Sarah's. At the photograph on the wall. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. Don't let grief make you disappear, Ethan. Promise me. He'd broken that promise. For 3 years, he'd been a ghost. But tonight, for the first time since Sarah died, he'd felt alive, useful, like he had a purpose beyond just waiting to die. The sun broke over the horizon. Golden light flooded across the Arizona territory. And with it came the sound Ethan had been waiting for. The sound that would determine if he lived to see another sunset. 150 Apache warriors moved into position. A perfect circle. No gaps, no weakness. Each warrior positioned exactly where they needed to be to ensure nothing and no one escaped. At the center of the circle, one man sat on a black horse. Even from inside the cabin, Ethan could see the war bonnet. 40 eagle feathers, each one representing some honor or achievement. This was a man of importance, a chief, a war leader. This was Napaya. Ethan stood. His legs were stiff from sitting all night. His back ached. His hands were wrinkled from the constant exposure to cold water. He was exhausted, but he was also, strangely, at peace. Whatever happened next, he'd done the right thing. He'd saved a life. After 3 years of being dead inside, he'd finally done something that made him feel alive. He will want to see you, Dakota said. He will want to judge you. I know, Ethan said. You could hide, Dakota said. Stay in here, we will go out. Tell him you helped. Ethan looked at her, this young woman who'd held a knife on him just hours ago, who'd watched him all night with suspicion, who'd finally grudgingly decided he might not be a monster. No, he said. If I hide, he'll never believe you. I face him, man to man. Dakota looked at him with something that might have been respect. He might kill you. Maybe, Ethan said. But I made a promise to my wife. I wouldn't hide from life anymore. This is life. He walked to the door, put his hand on the handle. Behind him, Dakota stood. Beside her, Kiona struggled to sit up. Wait, Kiona said in English, struggling to sit up straighter. Her voice was weak but determined. You, good man, I tell Father truth. You save Kiona. Ethan nodded, moved by her words despite the language barrier. Just rest. Save your strength. Dakota placed a hand on her sister's shoulder, speaking quietly in Apache. Then she turned to Ethan, her expression conflicted. She want, Dakota said carefully. When Father come, we tell him everything. You no hurt us, you help. This is truth. Will that be enough? Ethan asked. Dakota's silence was answer enough. Ethan took a deep breath and looked at the door. Whatever waited outside, he would face it standing. Thank you, he said to both sisters, for trusting me, for giving me a reason to care again. He opened the door. The morning light was blinding after the dim cabin. For a heartbeat, he stood on the threshold between the life he'd known and whatever came next. Then he stepped forward. 150 pairs of eyes locked onto him. 150 warriors, each one capable of ending his life in a heartbeat. And at the center of them all, Napaya sat on his black horse, watching, evaluating, judging. Ethan walked forward. His hands were visible and empty at his sides. No weapon, no threat, just a man walking toward his fate. 20 feet from Napaya, he stopped. The Apache chief dismounted, his feet touched the ground, and simultaneously, all 150 warriors placed their hands on their weapons. The message was clear. Touch our chief, and you die. Napaya walked toward Ethan. Up close, he was shorter than Ethan, but it didn't matter. Presence had nothing to do with height. This was a man who'd led warriors into battle and brought them home. A man who'd made decisions about life and death so many times they no longer weighed heavy on his conscience. They stood face to face. Neither man spoke. The silence stretched out, broken only by the sound of wind across the prairie and the occasional stamp of a horse's hoof. Finally, Napaya spoke. His English was clear and precise, with barely a trace of accent. "You have my daughters in your house." Not a question. A statement. "Yes," Ethan said. "Why?" "They needed help." "Many need help. Why them?" Ethan met the chief's eyes. "Because I know what it's like to watch someone die of fever and be helpless to stop it. I couldn't save my wife 3 years ago, but I could save your daughter. I had to try to beat them." Napaya's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe. He turned and called out in Apache. Dakota and Kiona emerged from the cabin. Kiona was leaning heavily on her sister, still weak but conscious and alive. Napaya looked at his daughters, then back at Ethan, then at the cabin. Without a word, he walked past Ethan and entered the cabin. Ethan stood frozen. Behind him, 150 warriors waited. 150 arrows that could be drawn in an instant. 150 reasons why he might not see another sunrise. Inside the cabin, Napaya examined everything. The bed where his daughters had slept, the bowl of water on the bedside table, the cold compresses, the bottle of quinine, the chair in the corner where Ethan had kept vigil all night. He picked up the photograph of Sarah, studied it for a long moment, set it back down carefully. He walked back outside and stood before Ethan. The sun was fully up now. Golden light painted everything. The waiting warriors, the property, the two men facing each other across a divide that seemed impossible to cross. Napaya raised his hand. Every warrior went silent, attentive. Then he did something Ethan didn't expect. He smiled. The old man's voice carried across the porch, steady and measured, as the sun dipped lower over the Arizona horizon. Daniel sat forward in his chair, coffee long forgotten, as his grandfather continued the story. "The smile Napaya gave me lasted only a heartbeat," Ethan said, his weathered hands folded in his lap. "But in that heartbeat, I knew. I wasn't going to die that morning. At least, not yet." The memory pulled him back, and once again he was 38 years old, standing before 150 Apache warriors as dawn painted the desert gold. Napaya turned away from Ethan and faced his assembled warriors. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority earned through decades of leadership, through battles won and lost, through decisions that had saved his people and decisions that had cost them dearly. He spoke in Apache. The language flowed like water over stones, each syllable deliberate and purposeful. The warriors stood motionless on their horses, faces carved from stone, listening to every word. Ethan stood frozen, understanding nothing but feeling everything. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension. His life hung suspended, balanced on words he couldn't comprehend in a language he'd never learned. Dakota emerged from the cabin and took her place beside Ethan. She kept her eyes forward, watching her father, but her voice was quiet as she translated. "Father says, warriors of the Chiricahua Apache, Ashihash. We rode through the night to deliver justice. We came believing a white man had taken our daughters, had harmed them when they were weak, had used their vulnerability as all white men do." Napaya's tone shifted, becoming less harsh, still commanding, but touched with something else, something almost like wonder. "We came prepared for war. We came prepared to make an example. We came prepared to show all settlers what happens when they touch Apache daughters." He paused. The silence stretched out. A hawk cried somewhere in the distance. Ethan could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. "But we did not find what we expected. We found something I did not think existed anymore. We found a white man who gave everything. His bed, where his own wife once slept. His medicine, expensive and rare. His sleep, staying awake all night to tend a stranger. His safety, knowing we would come and knowing he might die for his kindness." Napaya's voice grew quieter, more personal. Ethan saw some of the warriors lean forward slightly, straining to hear. "7 winters ago, my wife Aaliyah was killed by white soldiers. She was gathering herbs to heal our children when bullets found her. I held her as she died, as her blood soaked into the earth. With her last breath, she made me promise something. She said, 'Not all white men are evil, my husband, Promise me you will remember this. Promise me you will not let hate consume you. Promise me you will know the difference between those who kill and those who heal." Ethan saw Napaya's shoulders tense. The chief's voice remained steady, but the pain beneath it was unmistakable. Ethan knew that pain. He'd carried the same weight in his own voice every time he tried to speak Sarah's name in the first year after she died. "I promised her," Napaya continued, "but for 7 winters, I have kept that promise only in the smallest way. I did not kill white men on sight. I did not attack their towns. I did not seek revenge. But I also did not trust. I did not believe any white man could see Apache as people. I thought my wife's dying wish was beautiful but foolish. Hope without foundation." He turned and looked directly at Ethan. Their eyes met across the space between them, and Ethan saw something unexpected in the chief's gaze. Not gratitude, not friendship, but recognition. The recognition of one wounded man seeing another. "Today, this man has proven my wife was right. Her hope was not foolish. It was true. There are white men who see people instead of enemies, who heal instead of harm, who give instead of take, who keep their honor even when no one is watching. Ethan Cross is such a man." Napaya raised his right hand and placed it over his heart. Then he extended it toward Ethan. The motion was slow, ceremonial, weighted with meaning. 150 warriors mirrored the gesture as one, hands over hearts, then extended. The synchronization was perfect, practiced, sacred. "This is the gesture of family," Dakota whispered. "It means your heartbeat is my heartbeat. Your blood is my blood. Your enemy is my enemy. Your life is my responsibility." Ethan tried to copy the movement. His hand felt clumsy as it pressed against his chest, awkward as it extended toward Napaya. But he completed the gesture, and something passed between them. An understanding, an acceptance. Napaya nodded once, sharp and definitive. Then he switched to English, his words careful but clear. "You saved my daughter's life. In our tradition, this creates a debt that cannot be paid with gold or horses or land. It can only be honored with protection and loyalty that lasts beyond one lifetime." He stepped closer, closing the distance between them until they stood face to face. Up close, Ethan could see every line on the chief's face, every scar that told a story of survival, every gray hair earned through years of carrying the weight of his people's survival. "From this day forward, you are under the protection of the Chiricahua Apache. You are not white man. You are not outsider. You are family. Any warrior who passes this land will know you. Any threat to you is a threat to all of us. Any harm done to you will be answered by all of us." Ethan found his voice, though it came out rougher than intended. "I don't need payment. I didn't help your daughters expecting anything in return." Something that might have been a smile touched Napaya's lips. "I know. That is exactly why you deserve this honor. You thought helping was simply what any decent person should do. Most men do not think this way. Most men calculate the cost before offering kindness. You offered kindness and only later considered the cost. This makes you rare. This makes you worthy." Napaya extended his hand in the white man's tradition. Ethan took it, feeling the strength in that grip, the calluses that matched his own from years of hard work. The connection between two men who had both loved and lost and somehow kept living anyway. "I am Napaya," the chief said. "I tell you my name not as chief speaking to citizen, but as man speaking to man. I want you to know my name because you are now friend to my family. You are now family yourself." "Ethan Cross," he replied, "and the honor is mine." The handshake lasted several seconds longer than courtesy required. It was a promise, a pact, a bridge built between two worlds that had been at war for generations. Napaya released Ethan's hand and turned back to his daughters. He spoke to them in Apache, his tone shifting from the formal voice of a chief to the concerned voice of a father. Stern but gentle, proud but worried. Kiona answered first. Though her voice was weak from her ordeal, it carried clearly in the morning air. She spoke at length, her eyes moving between her father and Ethan, telling a story that Ethan could only guess at, but whose meaning was clear in her tone. Gratitude, trust, transformation. Dakota spoke next. Her voice was stronger, more animated. She gestured toward the cabin, toward Ethan, toward herself. She was defending him, Ethan realized, making the case that he was trustworthy, that his help had been genuine, that he'd asked for nothing in return. When both daughters finished speaking, Napaya was silent for a long moment. Then, without a word to anyone, he walked past Ethan and entered the cabin. Ethan remained outside, surrounded by 150 warriors whose hands rested on weapons, whose eyes tracked his every movement. If Napaya decided against him, if some piece of evidence inside that cabin changed his mind, those weapons would be drawn in an instant. Ethan would be dead before he could take a breath to protest. Inside the small cabin, Napaya moved like a detective examining a crime scene. But there was no hostility in his inspection, only thoroughness. He was a man who'd survived this long by paying attention to details, by trusting his observations more than his assumptions. He touched the bed where his daughters had slept. His fingers traced the clean sheets, noting how they'd been carefully maintained despite the sweat and medicine stains. He picked up one of the pillows, felt its weight, set it back down precisely where it had been. He examined the bowls of water on the bedside table, 3 different bowls at 3 different levels. Evidence of repeated changes throughout the night, of constant vigilance, of a man who'd stayed awake to tend to patients who should have been enemies. He opened the medical kit still sitting on the table. His fingers traced over the thermometer, its mercury still showing the last temperature he'd measured. He picked up the bottle of quinine, read the label carefully. United States Army Medical Corps, 1865. This medicine is valuable, he said, loud enough for Ethan to hear outside. Expensive, difficult to obtain. You used it on strangers, on Apache. Medicine is for the sick, Ethan called back. Doesn't matter who they are. Napaya set the bottle down and picked up the Bible from beneath the chair in the corner. It was open to Psalms, 23rd chapter. The pages were worn, read many times. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. You prayed, Napaya said. Still not a question, an observation. I did, Ethan confirmed, for my daughter, a stranger, an Apache girl you'd never met. For a girl who was dying. That's all I saw. Napaya closed the Bible with care and returned it to its place. Then he picked up the daguerreotype photograph of Sarah from the wall. He studied it with the same intensity he'd given everything else in the cabin, as if he could read the story of Ethan's loss in the fading image. Your wife, he said. She was beautiful. She was everything, Ethan replied quietly. How did she die? Fever, same kind that nearly took your daughter. I tried everything I knew, every remedy from my years as an army medic. Nothing worked. She lasted 6 days. On the last day, the only day she was truly conscious after the fever took hold, she made me promise not to disappear, not to let grief turn me into a ghost. Napaya carefully replaced the photograph on the wall, adjusting it until it hung exactly as it had before. But you became a ghost anyway. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of observed fact. I did, Ethan admitted. For 3 years, I've been going through motions, working to avoid thinking, existing but not living. I broke my promise to her every single day. I understand, Napaya said quietly. He emerged from the cabin and stood before Ethan again. When Aaliyah died in my arms, when her blood soaked into my clothes and I had to wash it out, knowing I would never hold her again, I became something less than a man. I became only a chief, only a warrior, only someone who fought and planned and survived. I forgot how to be a father, a friend, a person who felt things. He paused, looking toward the Dragoon Mountains in the distance. Your wife told you not to disappear. My wife told me not to hate. We both broke our promises. We both became ghosts in different ways. But maybe today we both can begin to keep those promises again. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went deeper than words. They were the same. 2 men who'd loved with their whole hearts and lost devastatingly. 2 men who tried to protect themselves from more pain by shutting out the world. 2 men who'd made promises to dying wives and then spent years failing to honor them. Walk with me, Napaya said. There are things we must discuss. Important things. They left the immediate area around the cabin. The 150 warriors remained in position, patient and vigilant. Napaya led Ethan to a small ridge about 200 yards north. From there, the entire landscape spread out before them. To the north, the Dragoon Mountains rose purple in the morning light. To the south, barely visible, the town of Copper Ridge sent up thin trails of smoke from breakfast fires. East and west, the desert stretched out, beautiful and brutal in equal measure. "You chose to live here alone," Napaya said. "Why?" "I told myself it was choice," Ethan replied. "Truth is, it was cowardice. After Sarah died, being around people reminded me of what I'd lost. Every conversation, every interaction, every shared moment just made the emptiness worse. Out here, I didn't have to pretend. I could just be miserable without anyone trying to make me feel better." "I know this feeling," Napaya said. "After Aaliyah died, women from our tribe offered to help raise my daughters. Good women who wanted to help. I sent them all away. I told myself my daughters needed their father to be strong, not to show weakness by accepting help. Truth was, I was afraid. Afraid that if I let anyone close, I would lose them too. Easier to be alone than to risk caring." They stood in silence, two men on a ridge watching the sun climb higher, bound together by parallel griefs and parallel failures. "I give you protection today," Napaya said finally, "but I must also give you a warning. There are things you need to understand about the danger you now face." "What warning?" "The world is changing faster than either of us wants to admit. More settlers arrive every month. Land that has been Apache land for generations is claimed by white men with papers saying it now belongs to them. Treaties are signed and then broken when they become inconvenient. Anger grows on both sides." He turned to look directly at Ethan. "You are now caught in the middle. Your people will see you as a traitor for helping Apache. They will say you have been corrupted, that you have betrayed your own kind. My people, especially the younger warriors, some will doubt you. They will think you are tricking us, using kindness as a weapon to gain our trust before you betray us." Ethan absorbed this. "I understand the risk I'm taking." "No," Napaya said firmly, "not yet. You understand in your mind, but you have not yet felt it in your body. So listen carefully to what I tell you now." He pointed toward Copper Ridge. "There is a man in your town, Marcus Sullivan. You know him?" "I know of him," Ethan said. "He owns the largest ranch near Copper Ridge, influential, has strong opinions about Apache." "He is more than a man with opinions," Napaya said. "He is a man with a plan. For 6 months now, cattle have been stolen from settler ranches. The tracks show Apache moccasins. The thieves leave Apache arrows. They wear Apache clothing. Your people are being blamed. Yes, but it is not Apache doing this. I know where every warrior in my tribe is every day. I know their movements. I know their hearts. We do not steal cattle anymore. We have negotiated for our own herds, traded fairly for them, and we have no need to steal." "Then who?" "Sullivan's men, wearing Apache clothing. The arrows they leave behind are poorly made, wrong style, wrong fletching. A white man pretending to know Apache craft but getting the details wrong. But most settlers cannot tell the difference. They see what they expect to see." Ethan felt cold despite the rising heat. Why would Sullivan do this? Because he wants war. If there is war between Apache and settlers, the army will come. They will drive us from this land, and when we are gone, Sullivan will claim our territory. Rich land with good water. Land worth much money to the right buyer. He creates the violence, blames us, and waits for the army to solve his problem. Does anyone else know? Your deputy, James Hawkins, he suspects something is wrong. He has found inconsistencies. Boot prints where there should be moccasin prints. Shell casings from guns Apache do not use. But he has no proof that would stand up against Sullivan's influence. And Sullivan has many friends. Many men who will swear they saw Apache commit these crimes. Napaya's eyes darken. Sullivan is the kind of man who will burn down a world to rule the ashes. He will not stop with cattle. He will come for you, Ethan. Not tomorrow, perhaps, but soon. And when he does, you must not hesitate to call us. Napaya paused, letting this sink in. You need to know this because Sullivan will hate you now. You helped Apache. In his calculation, that makes you his enemy. A loose end. A complication. Let him think what he wants. It is not about thinking, Napaya said. It is about action. Sullivan is the kind of man who must prove himself, must demonstrate his power. He will test you. He will try to hurt you. And when I protect you, when my warriors come to your aid, he will use that as evidence. He will tell everyone, see, the Apache control Cross. He is their puppet, not their friend. This will make his case for war even stronger. Ethan looked at the distant town, feeling the weight of the trap closing around him. He'd spent 3 years avoiding the conflicts of the world. Now, by doing one decent thing, he'd placed himself directly in the center of a conflict he couldn't escape. If you truly need help, Nepiah said, if your life is in real danger, there is a way to call us. He knelt and used a stick to draw in the dirt, 3 circles arranged in a triangle pattern. 3 fires, each one 50 feet from the others. Light them at night when they can be seen for many miles. Any Apache warrior who sees this pattern will know. This is a call for help. They will come immediately and bring others. What if I use it wrong? What if I call for help when there's no real danger? Nepiah looked at him steadily. You will not. You are a man who understands the weight of asking for help. You are a man who would rather face danger alone than impose on others. This is both your strength and your weakness. So hear me clearly. Do not hesitate to light those fires if you truly need help. Pride has killed more men than bullets. Asking for help is not weakness. It is wisdom. Ethan memorized the pattern. 3 fires in a triangle. Simple geometry that could save his life. They walked back toward the cabin. The sun was climbing higher now, the heat building toward the brutal intensity of midday. The warriors had been here for hours, patient and disciplined, but they had lives to return to. Families waiting. Responsibilities. Dakota and Kiona stood by the cabin door. Kiona looked stronger already, color returning to her face, though she still leaned heavily on her sister. The resilience of youth, or perhaps the resilience of people who'd learned early that survival required toughness. Nepiah spoke to his daughters in Apache. The conversation was longer this time, more back and forth. At one point, both sisters protested, their voices rising. Nepiah's tone became stern, brooking no argument. They quieted. He continued, softer now, explaining something. They nodded, accepting whatever he'd said. When he finished, he turned to Ethan. My daughters wish to give you gifts. This is our way. Life for life must be honored. They have chosen well. But before the daughters could step forward, Nepiah reached to his own belt and unsheathed a knife. The blade gleamed in the morning light, 8 inches of perfectly maintained steel. The elk antler handle bore carved symbols, and the leather sheath showed intricate beadwork. This knife belonged to my grandfather. Then my father, now me, Nepiah said. 3 generations. It has protected my family in war and peace. It saved my life twice. He held the knife out to Ethan horizontally, the formal presentation of a weapon that meant something. Now it protects you. When men see this knife on your belt, they will know. This man is not just friend to Apache. He is family to the chief's family. To harm him is to declare war on all of us. Ethan took the knife with both hands, feeling the weight of it. Not just the physical weight of steel and antler, but the weight of history. 3 generations of men who'd carried this blade. 3 generations of stories carved into its surface. I don't know if I can accept this, Ethan said. It's too valuable, too important to your family. You are family now, Nepiah said simply, and a knife is meant to be carried, not locked away. Carry it with honor. Use it to protect, not to harm without cause. That is all I ask. I promise, Ethan said. He attached the knife to his belt. It sat there, foreign and familiar all at once, the leather of the sheath warm against his hip. Now Kiona stepped forward. From a small pouch at her waist, she withdrew a bundle wrapped in soft cloth. She unwrapped it carefully, reverently, revealing the bracelet of woven leather and turquoise beads. Our mother made this with her own hands, Kiona said in halting English, each word carefully chosen. She wore it every day, even when soldiers came, even when she was dying. She wore it. Tears ran down Kiona's face, but her voice remained steady. My mother was a good woman. She believed some white men had good hearts. She believed not everyone was an enemy. You proved she was right. This protected her spirit. Now it protects you. Dakota helped her sister tie the bracelet around Ethan's wrist. The leather was soft, worn smooth by years of contact with skin, warm as if it still held the body heat of the woman who'd worn it before. "I'll treasure this," Ethan said. "Always." "Is not treasure," Kiona corrected gently but firmly. "Is promise. You wear this, you promise to keep living. Keep helping. Keep being man who sees people, not enemies. Keep being man who chooses kindness even when it costs everything." Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. Now it was his turn. He disappeared into the cabin and returned carrying his medical kit, the battered leather case with its tarnished brass fittings. 13 years of careful preservation. 13 years of carrying tools he'd barely used since the war ended. "This was issued to me in 1863, he said. "I carried it through the entire war. Every battle, every camp, every field hospital. I used these instruments to save men who should have died. Men with bullets in their lungs, with shattered bones, with infections that should have killed them." He opened the case, showing the contents. Scalpels still sharp, forceps still precise, sutures still carefully wound, a thermometer that had measured 1,000 fevers. "This is the most valuable thing I own, not because of its monetary worth, but because of what it represents. Every life saved, every soldier who went home to his family instead of into the ground." He held the kit out to Napaya. "I want your healers to have this, so they can continue saving lives. So these tools keep doing what they were made to do, healing, helping, giving people second chances." Napaya took the kit and examined the contents with something approaching reverence. His fingers traced the instruments, understanding immediately their quality and their purpose. "A gift from a healer is sacred among our people," he said quietly. "These tools will be honored. They will be used wisely. They will save many lives. We will not forget that they came from you." He closed the kit carefully and handed it to one of the nearby warriors, speaking instructions in Apache. The warrior nodded and secured the kit to his saddle with obvious care, treating it like the precious thing it was. "Now we must leave," Napia said. "We have been here many hours. Our people will be worried. They will be wondering if we found our daughters dead or alive, if we delivered justice or mercy." He raised his voice, speaking to all the warriors in Apache. They began mounting their horses with the same perfect synchronization they'd shown in everything else. Within 3 minutes, all 150 warriors were mounted and ready to move. Napaya swung onto his black stallion in one smooth motion. From horseback, he looked down at Ethan. "Remember everything I have told you. Sullivan is dangerous and he will act against you. Trust Hawkins if you must trust someone decent in town, but even then, be careful. Walls have ears and friends can be bought." "I'll remember," Ethan said. "And remember the signal. 3 fires in a triangle. If you need us, we will come. Do not be too proud to ask. Do not be too stubborn to accept help. Those qualities will get you killed." Napaya raised his hand. One sharp whistle cut through the air. As the 150 warriors turned their horses and began to move. They flowed from their circle formation into a column, moving north toward the mountains with the efficiency of a military unit that had practiced this maneuver 1,000 times. Dakota and Kiona lingered for a moment before mounting their own horses. Dakota approached Ethan, and for the first time since they'd met, she smiled. It was a small smile, guarded and careful, but genuine. "When I first saw you walking toward us yesterday," she said, "I was ready to kill you. I had my knife, and I would have used it without hesitation if you had tried to harm us." "I know," Ethan said. "You had every reason to feel that way. But you proved me wrong. You are a rare man, a rare white man who sees past the surface, who sees people instead of categories, who acts with honor even when no one is forcing you to." She placed her hand on his shoulder in the Apache gesture of intimacy and trust. "If you call for help, I will come personally. I am a good fighter, better than many of the men." "I believe you," Ethan said with a slight smile. Kiona stepped forward and, without warning or preamble, hugged him. It surprised them both. She was still weak from her ordeal, and the embrace was brief, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. "Thank you for seeing me," she whispered. "Not Apache girl, not enemy, not stranger, just Kiona, just person who needed help. You saw me when you could have looked away." "Thank you for trusting me," Ethan replied. for giving me a reason to care about something again, for reminding me why I became a healer in the first place. The sisters mounted their horses and rode after the column of warriors. At the top of the ridge, all three turned back one final time. Napaya raised his hand, not waving but signaling, "We are watching over you." Then they disappeared over the ridge, and Ethan was alone. He stood in the center of his property as the morning advanced toward noon. The sun climbed higher, the heat building, the shadows shrinking. Everything looked exactly as it had 24 hours ago. Same cabin, same corrals, same fence line. But everything was different. He looked down at the bracelet on his wrist, felt the knife at his hip. Both were foreign objects, things that hadn't been part of his life yesterday. But they felt right. They felt like connections he'd been denying himself for 3 years. For the first time since Sarah died, Ethan felt something other than emptiness. Not happiness, not yet, but possibility. The possibility that life could be more than just enduring until death. The possibility that he could matter to someone again. The possibility that he could be something more than a ghost going through motions. He turned toward the cabin, thinking about cleaning up, maybe sleeping, maybe eating something more substantial than hardtack. But before he could take a step, he heard it. Horses. Again. But these were coming from a different direction. From the south, from Copper Ridge. He turned and saw them. 8 riders moving fast, kicking up dust. Even from a distance, he could identify the man in the lead. Marcus Sullivan rode a gray stallion that had probably cost more than everything Ethan owned combined. Ethan's hand moved instinctively to the knife at his hip. The motion was automatic, protective. Then he forced himself to relax. If Sullivan was here for trouble, responding with violence would only confirm whatever narrative Sullivan was building. He let his hands hang loose at his sides and waited. The 8 riders pulled up hard about 20 feet away, horses snorting and stamping. Sullivan dismounted with practiced ease, a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle and was comfortable projecting authority. He was 45 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that came from having money and power and never being told no. His face was red, whether from the hard ride or from barely contained anger. Ethan couldn't tell. Behind Sullivan came 7 other men. Deputy James Hawkins looked distinctly uncomfortable, his eyes scanning the situation like he was trying to figure out how it might go wrong. Cole Hansen, Sullivan's foreman, was a block of a man with a reputation for solving problems with his fists and occasionally his gun. 5 other townsmen filled out the group, farmers and ranchers Ethan vaguely recognized, all armed. "Cross," Sullivan said without preamble. His voice was tight, controlled fury, barely leashed. "We heard reports. Over 100 Apache warriors surrounding your property this morning. Care to explain what that was about?" 150, Ethan corrected, keeping his voice level. "They came to retrieve their daughters. I sheltered 2 Apache women last night. One had a fever that would have killed her without treatment. I'm a medic. I helped them." Sullivan's face darkened to an even deeper red. "Sheltered. That's what traitors are calling it these days." The men behind him muttered agreement, shifting in their saddle. Hands moved toward gun belts. The threat was implicit but clear. "I saved a dying girl," Ethan said calmly. "Nothing more complicated than that." "Nothing more?" Sullivan's voice rose. "You gave aid and comfort to the enemy. You probably shared intelligence about our defenses, our numbers, where we're weakest. You endangered every settler in this territory. I gave medical care to someone with a fever. That's the beginning and end of the story." "That's treason," Sullivan spat. "You chose your side, Cross. You're no longer one of us. You made that clear when you let Apache warriors surround your property and ride away without anyone getting hurt." Deputy Hawkins spoke up, his voice measured and official. "Marcus, he didn't break any law. Providing medical care isn't a crime, not even to Apache." Sullivan whirled on him. "Whose side are you on, Hawkins?" "The law's side," Hawkins replied firmly. "And the law says helping sick people isn't illegal." "The law," Sullivan said with contempt. "Out here, the law is what keeps people alive. And what keeps people alive is loyalty, standing with your own kind, not betraying them to make friends with savages." Cole Hansen moved his horse forward, flanking Ethan on the left. 2 other men did the same on the right. They were boxing him in, cutting off escape routes, making it clear that if things turned violent, he'd have nowhere to run. Law doesn't matter much when you're miles from town, Hansen said. His voice was flat and cold, the voice of a man comfortable with violence. What matters is whose side you're on, and Crosshair just made it real clear he's not on ours. Ethan's muscles tensed involuntarily. 8 against 1. If it came to a fight, he'd lose badly. His hand itched toward the knife, but he kept it still. Drawing a weapon would only escalate things, would give them the excuse they might be looking for. Sullivan took another step closer, close enough now that Ethan could smell the tobacco on his breath. When war comes, and mark my words, it will come, you better pray your Apache friends protect you, because none of us will lift a finger. You're on your own, Cross. You made your bed. Now you get to die in it. A whistle cut through the air, sharp and clear and utterly unexpected. Everyone froze, turned to look. 5 Apache warriors sat on horseback along the ridgeline to the north, 300 yards away, but clearly visible in the bright morning light. They weren't aiming weapons. They weren't making threatening gestures. They were simply there, watching. The message couldn't have been clearer if they'd shouted it. We see what's happening. Try something. Sullivan's face went from red to white in an instant. His hand jerked away from his pistol as if the metal had burned him. You're under their protection, he said slowly, each word forced out through clenched teeth. You're actually under Apache protection. You made a deal with them. They offered protection, Ethan said simply. I accepted it. For a moment, Sullivan looked like he might try something anyway, pride warring with self-preservation. The desire to save face battling against the very real threat of 5 Apache warriors who could drop all 8 of them before they cleared leather. Self-preservation won. Sullivan turned and mounted his horse in one angry, graceless motion. This isn't over, Cross. Not by a long shot. You made your choice. Now you live with every consequence that comes from it. And when your Apache friends turn on you, when they decide you're not useful anymore, don't come crying to us for help. He wheeled his horse hard enough to make it sidestep, then rode off at a gallop. The other men followed, though Cole Hansen lingered for a moment. He stared at Ethan with eyes that promised future violence, making it clear this was personal now. Then he too turned and rode after Sullivan. Deputy Hawkins was the last to leave. He brought his horse close to Ethan, speaking quietly so the others wouldn't hear. Sullivan's planning something, he said urgently. I don't know what yet, but I know him. He doesn't forget slights. He doesn't forgive challenges to his authority. And he's got enough money to make problems disappear. I understand, Ethan said. I'll do what I can to keep an eye on him. Try to figure out what he's planning. But my authority only goes so far, especially against someone with Sullivan's connections. Hawkins paused. Be careful, Cross, real careful. Check your fences. Watch your back. Don't ride anywhere alone if you can help it. I appreciate the warning. Hawkins nodded and rode after the others, leaving Ethan alone in the growing heat of the day. Ethan looked up at the ridge. The 5 Apache warriors were still there, silhouettes against the bright sky. One of them, the one in the center, raised his hand in acknowledgement. Ethan raised his hand in return. A gesture of thanks, a recognition that the protection was real, not just ceremonial words spoken at dawn. The warriors turned their horses and disappeared over the ridge, melting into the landscape as if they'd never been there at all. Ethan stood alone, but not isolated. That was the crucial difference. For 3 years, he'd been alone by choice, by design, by desperate need to avoid the pain of human connection. Now he was alone by circumstance, but connected by choice. Connected to Napaya and his family. Connected to a promise he'd made to Sarah. Connected to a purpose larger than just surviving another day. He walked back to the cabin. Inside, everything was exactly as he'd left it. The bed still unmade, sheets twisted from Kiona's fever. The bowls of water on the table. The empty space where his medical kit had been. He sat in the chair by the window, the same chair he'd occupied all night while watching over a stranger. His body ached with exhaustion. His eyes burned from lack of sleep. His hands trembled slightly from adrenaline finally wearing off. But he needed to do one thing before he could rest. He pulled out paper and pencil from the small desk. His hand hovered over the blank page for a moment, Then he began to write. My dearest Sarah, 3 years ago, I promised you something. I promised I wouldn't disappear. I promised I wouldn't let grief turn me into a ghost. I broke that promise. For 1,095 days, I broke it, every single morning. But last night, something changed. Two strangers appeared at my door. One was dying. I had a choice. I could turn away, stay safe, stay isolated, stay dead inside. Or I could help, risk everything, open myself to caring again. I chose to help. And in choosing to help, I finally began to keep my promise to you. I don't know what happens next. I made enemies today. Powerful enemies who won't forget and won't forgive. But I also made family. Not by blood, but by but by choice, by action, by seeing people instead of categories. You always said the world needed people who saw others as human first. I'm trying to be that person again. The person you believed I could be. The person I was before grief hollowed me out. I'll never stop missing you. But I'm finally learning to live alongside the grief instead of being crushed by it. Thank you for not giving up on me, even after you left. Forever yours, Ethan. He folded the letter and placed it in the small wooden box where he kept his most precious items. Sarah's wedding ring, which he still wore on a chain around his neck. A lock of her hair, a dried flower from their wedding day. And now this letter. He lay down on the bed without bothering to undress. The sheets still smelled like medicine and fever, but they also smelled like accomplishment, like purpose, like something that mattered. As sleep finally pulled him under, his last conscious thought was of Napaya's words. Words about promises kept and ghosts becoming men again. Ethan had been dead inside for 3 years. Today, finally, he'd begun to live. The sun was setting over Copper Ridge as the old man paused in his story. Daniel had been silent for nearly an hour, absorbed completely in his grandfather's tale. Now Ethan reached for his coffee cup, found it empty, and set it down with a soft clink. That should have been the end of it, Ethan said quietly. I should have been able to live out my days in peace, protected by the Apache, keeping to myself, but Sullivan wasn't the type of man to let things go. And 2 weeks later, everything came to a head. Daniel leaned forward. What happened? Let me show you something first, Ethan said. He stood slowly, joints protesting, and walked to the door. Come inside. They entered the house and Ethan led his grandson to the study. The walls were covered with photographs spanning 8 decades. Daniel had seen them before, but never really looked at them. Now, with the story fresh in his mind, they took on new meaning. That's Napaya, Ethan said, pointing to a photograph from 1880. 2 men stood side by side, arms around each other's shoulders. One was clearly Ethan, younger but recognizable. The other was an Apache chief in traditional dress. Both were smiling. And that's Dakota at her wedding in 1882. I was there. Gave her away when her father couldn't make the journey. And Kiona with her children in 1890. 3 boys, all of them grew up to be good men. Daniel stared at the photographs, seeing the evidence of a lifetime of connection his grandfather had never spoken about in detail until today. They're all gone now, Ethan said softly. Napaya died in 1920. Dakota passed 10 years ago. Kiona in 1946. But their children and grandchildren still visit me, still honor the bond their family made with me that morning in 1876. But I'm getting ahead of myself, Ethan continued. Let me finish the story. Let me tell you about the 2 weeks that tested everything. The memory pulled him back again, and he was once more 38 years old, standing in his property on a hot August afternoon. The 2 weeks following Napaya's visit were strange ones. Ethan had expected trouble from Sullivan, but days passed with nothing but silence. No more visitors from town, no threats, no confrontations, just the desert heat and the regular routines of maintaining a homestead alone. But the silence itself felt ominous, like the stillness before a storm. Ethan worked his land during those weeks, but he worked differently now. He checked fence lines not just for breaks, but for signs of tampering. He watched the horizon not just for weather, but for riders. He slept lighter, waking at every unfamiliar sound. The bracelet stayed on his wrist. The knife stayed on his hip. Both had become part of him so quickly, it felt like they'd always been there. On the 5th day, he rode into Copper Ridge for supplies. He needed flour, coffee, ammunition for hunting. Basic necessities he couldn't produce himself. The town's reaction to his presence was immediate and unmistakable. Conversations stopped when he entered the general store. People moved away from him in the aisles. The store owner, a man named Patterson, who'd always been friendly before, served him with cold efficiency and no small talk. When Ethan tried to pay, Patterson said flatly, "We don't extend credit to Apache sympathizers." "I'm paying cash," Ethan replied calmly. "Then I suppose I'll take your money, but don't expect a warm welcome here anymore." Ethan gathered his supplies and left. As he loaded his saddlebags outside, he noticed a group of men watching him from across the street. Not threatening, not approaching, just watching, making sure he knew he was being observed. Deputy Hawkins found him as he was preparing to leave. "Cross," the deputy said quietly, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "Things are getting worse. Sullivan's been spreading stories. Says you're working with the Apache to plan attacks. Says the reason they didn't kill you is because you're feeding them information." "That's ridiculous." "I know that. You know that. But most people in this town want to believe it because it's easier than accepting that maybe the Apache aren't the monsters they've been told they are." "What else is Sullivan doing?" Hawkins hesitated, then said, "He's been meeting with some rough men, drifters, the kind you hire when you want something done but don't want it traced back to you. I can't prove anything yet, but I'm watching him closely. I appreciate the warning. Just be careful, and if anything happens, anything at all, you ride straight to me. Don't try to handle it alone." Ethan nodded and rode home, acutely aware of eyes following him until he was well out of town. The night of August 26th changed everything. Ethan woke to a sound that didn't belong. A distant crack, like a tree branch breaking. But there were no trees close enough to his cabin to make that sound. His eyes opened in the darkness, and immediately he smelled it. Smoke. He was out of bed and pulling on his boots before his mind fully processed what was happening. He grabbed the knife from his bedside table, strapped it to his belt, and rushed outside. The barn was on fire. Flames climbed the wooden walls, bright orange against the black sky. The heat was already intense even from 50 yards away. And inside the barn, Amban. He could hear his horses screaming, thunder and whisper. Trapped, terrified. Ethan ran toward the barn without thinking. The heat hit him like a physical wall when he was still 20 feet away, but he pushed through it. The door was already burning, but he kicked it open anyway, flames licking at his boots. Inside, the smoke was thick and choking. He couldn't see more than a few feet. He pulled his shirt up over his nose and mouth and pushed forward, guided by the sound of Thunder's panicked whinnies. He found the Morgan stallion first. Thunder's eyes were rolling white with fear, his powerful body slamming against the stall door. Ethan threw the latch and grabbed Thunder's halter, pulling him toward where he remembered the door being. Thunder fought him at first, instinct telling him to stay away from the flames. But Ethan's voice cut through the panic. "Come on, boy, trust me. Come on." The horse followed, and Ethan led him out into the blessed coolness of the night air. He slapped Thunder's rump, sending him galloping away from the burning structure. Then he turned and ran back in. The fire had spread in the 30 seconds he'd been outside. The roof was starting to collapse. Burning embers fell like rain. The smoke was even thicker, burning his lungs with every breath. He found Whisper at the back of the barn. The mare was beyond panic, kicking frantically at her stall, foam on her neck. A burning beam had fallen across the stall door, blocking it. Ethan grabbed the beam with his bare hands. The pain was instant and excruciating, his palms blistering from the heat. But he lifted it anyway, shoving it aside with a strength born of desperation. He got the stall door open and grabbed Whisper's halter. The mare reared, nearly striking him, but he held on. "Easy, girl, easy, it's me. It's okay. We're getting out." He led her toward the exit just as another section of roof collapsed behind them. Flames and sparks erupted. The heat was unbearable. Ethan's shirt was smoking. They burst out of the barn into the night. Ethan led Whisper 50 yards away before releasing her. She bolted after Thunder, both horses disappearing into the darkness. Ethan collapsed to his knees, coughing violently, his lungs burning from the smoke. His hands were a mess of blisters and burns. But both horses were safe. He watched the barn burn. There was no saving it now. The entire structure was engulfed, flames reaching 30 feet into the night sky. Everything inside was lost. Tools, saddles, feed for the winter, all of it gone. When he had enough breath to move, he walked the perimeter of the barn, looking for evidence. He found it quickly. Boot prints in the soft earth near the back of the barn. The distinctive tread of Army-issue boots, not the smooth leather soles most ranchers wore. A discarded Lucifer match, the kind sold at Patterson's General Store. And most damning, a cigar stub. Expensive tobacco, the kind Sullivan was known to smoke. This was arson, and it was a message. Ethan stood in the flickering light of the dying fire and made a decision. He could ride to town, report this to Hawkins, hope for justice through official channels. But that would take time. And while he was waiting for justice, Sullivan would try again. Next time it might not be just the barn, or he could do what Napaya had told him to do. He could ask for help. He gathered firewood, lots of it. It took him an hour, working with burned hands that screamed in protest with every movement. But he gathered 3 large piles of wood, each one carefully placed 50 feet from the others, forming a perfect triangle. At 11 o'clock at night, he lit all 3 fires. The flames climbed high into the darkness, 3 pillars of light visible for miles in every direction. The signal Napaya had taught him, the call for help. Then he waited. He didn't have to wait long. At 11:30, he heard horses approaching from the north, not 5, not 10. 30 Apache warriors emerged from the darkness, moving silently despite their numbers. At their head was Dakota. She dismounted and strode directly to Ethan, her eyes taking in the burned barn, his blistered hands, his smoke-stained clothes. "You called," she said simply. "We came." "What is the threat?" Ethan explained. "The fire, the evidence, Sullivan's campaign against him, the likelihood of more violence to come." Dakota examined the boot prints herself, running her fingers along the edge of one, reading the story written in disturbed earth. She sniffed the cigar stub, her expression hardening. "This was white man's attack," she said. "You want us to kill them?" The question was asked matter-of-factly, without bloodlust, but without hesitation either. If he said yes, she would do it. "No," Ethan said firmly, "no killing. But I need them to understand that attacking me has consequences. I need a deterrent, not a war." Dakota nodded slowly, a slight smile touching her lips. "Deterrent without killing, yes. This is wisdom. War creates more problems than it solves. Fear can be more effective than death." They spoke for another 20 minutes planning. Dakota's tactical mind was sharp, and she understood the psychology of men like Sullivan. By the time she left with her warriors, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Over the next 7 days, strange things began happening at Sullivan's ranch. On the first night, Sullivan woke to find an arrow embedded in the wooden post of his bed. It hadn't been there when he went to sleep. The window was locked from the inside. No one had heard anything. But there it was, quivering slightly from the force of impact, its point driven 2 inches into solid oak. On the third night, Cole Hansen found his horse's mane braided in the traditional Apache style, intricate patterns that would have taken hours to complete. His horse had been in a locked stable. 3 men had been on watch. No one had seen or heard anything. On the 5th night, Sullivan's foreman found his rifle missing from where he'd left it beside his bed. It was found the next morning, stuck upright in the ground outside the ranch house, 20 feet from where Sullivan slept. Someone had walked past guards, past dogs, into the house, taken the rifle, and planted it as a message without anyone noticing. The message was clear. "We can reach you anytime we want. Be grateful we choose not to harm you." By the 7th day, Sullivan's entire crew was jumpy and paranoid. Men who'd faced down Apache war parties in the past were now afraid to sleep. The psychological warfare was more effective than any battle could have been. Sullivan himself came to Ethan's property on the 8th day. But he didn't come with 8 men this time. He came alone, and his demeanor was completely different. "Cross," he said, dismounting but staying a respectful distance away. "I want to talk. Just talk. No threats, no violence." Ethan studied him carefully, looking for deception. But Sullivan's body language was different now. Less aggressive, almost deferential. "I'm listening," Ethan said. "I didn't burn your barn," Sullivan said. "I want you to know that. I talked about it. I won't lie about that, but I didn't do it. Your cigar was found at the scene. I know, Hansen told me, and I think I know who took it. One of those drifters I hired for ranch work, man named Carlson. He disappeared 3 days ago, right after your barn burned. Ethan considered this. It was possible. Men like Carlson would have their own reasons for wanting to cause trouble. Even if that's true, Ethan said, you created the environment that made it happen. You spread lies about me. You turned the town against me. You made me a target. Sullivan nodded slowly. You're right, I did, and I'm here to stop. Not because I suddenly like Apache, not because I think what you did was right, but because I'm not stupid. Your Apache friends made it very clear that if anything happens to you, they'll hold me responsible. And I'm not interested in starting a war I can't win. So this is just self-preservation. Call it whatever you want, but I'm here to make a deal. You stay out of my business, I stay out of yours. You don't interfere with my operations, I don't interfere with yours. We avoid each other. We tell our people to avoid each other. We maintain peace through distance. And if I see you stealing cattle and blaming the Apache? Sullivan's jaw tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, and so does Deputy Hawkins. He's been investigating. He's found evidence. Not enough to arrest you yet, but enough to be watching very carefully. For a long moment, Sullivan said nothing. Then he sighed, suddenly looking older and more tired. The cattle raids stop, as of today. You have my word. Your word doesn't mean much to me. And then take this as my word backed by self-interest. If I continue those raids and get caught, I lose everything. My ranch, my reputation, possibly my freedom. That's too high a price to pay for some extra land. Ethan studied him, weighing sincerity against expedience. Finally, he said, I'll accept your deal, but understand this. I have no interest in your business. But if I see innocent people being harmed, Apache or white, I will act. That's not negotiable. Fair enough, Sullivan said. He extended his hand. Ethan looked at it for a moment, then shook it briefly. It wasn't friendship. It was barely even truce. But it was acknowledgement that open conflict served neither of them. Sullivan mounted his horse and rode away. Ethan watched him go, not entirely trusting the peace but willing to give it a chance. Deputy Hawkins came by 2 days later with news. The drifter Carlson had been found trying to sell saddles and tools from Ethan's burned barn to a dealer in Tucson. When confronted, he'd confessed to the arson, claiming Sullivan had paid him to do it. Sullivan denied this, and without more evidence, Hawkins couldn't prove the connection. But Carlson was arrested and charged with arson. He'd spend 5 years in territorial prison. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. Sullivan's changed his tune, Hawkins said, publicly at least. He's been telling people to leave you alone. Says you're entitled to live how you want as long as you don't cause trouble. It's not a ringing endorsement, but it's better than calling you a traitor. It'll do, Ethan said. Over the following months, life began to settle into a new normal. Ethan rebuilt his barn, smaller than before but functional. Apache warriors would sometimes stop by to help with the heavy work, and Ethan began teaching some of their healers basic Western medicine in return. Dakota came by weekly, bringing news from the tribe and checking that he was safe. Kiona visited monthly, bringing medicines made from desert plants that Ethan had never learned to identify. She was teaching him slowly how to see the desert not as a wasteland, but as a pharmacy. Napaya came once a month and they would sit on Ethan's porch and talk about leadership, about loss, about the challenge of maintaining hope when the world seemed determined to crush it. They were an unlikely pair, an Apache chief and a white medic, but they'd become genuine friends. By February of 1877, 6 months after that fateful night when 2 strangers appeared at his door, Ethan's property looked different. The new barn stood strong. A vegetable garden flourished where Kiona had taught him to plant according to Apache methods that worked with the desert rather than against it. A small addition to his cabin served as a meeting room where settlers and Apache could come to resolve disputes peacefully. Ethan had become, almost without meaning to, a mediator. Someone both sides trusted. Someone who could translate not just language but intention and culture. He helped negotiate trades. He resolved boundary disputes. He prevented misunderstandings from becoming violence. He wasn't alone anymore. Deputy Hawkins visited regularly, having become a genuine friend. A few families from Copper Ridge, the ones who valued peace over prejudice, would come by for medical care. And the Apache treated his property as a neutral ground where they could interact with whites without fear. One evening in late February, Ethan sat at his desk and wrote another letter to Sarah. It had become his habit, writing to her every few months, telling her about the life he was building. My dearest Sarah, 6 months have passed since that morning when Napaya and his warriors surrounded this cabin. 6 months since I truly began to keep my promise to you. I'm not the same man I was when you died. I'm not even the same man I was 6 months ago. I've learned that strength isn't about standing alone. It's about knowing when to accept help, when to ask for it, when to offer it. I've learned that grief doesn't go away, but it can transform. It can become compassion, understanding, a bridge between your pain and someone else's, a recognition that we're all carrying burdens we didn't choose. I've learned that family isn't just blood, it's choice, action, showing up for someone when they need you and letting them show up for you. I've built something here, Sarah, not just a homestead, but a community, a place where people can see past their differences long enough to recognize their common humanity. I think you'd be proud. I hope you'd be proud. I still miss you every single day, but I'm finally living again, not just surviving. And that, I think, is what you wanted from me all along. Forever yours, Ethan. He folded the letter and added it to the collection in his wooden box. Then he walked outside and stood on his porch, looking at the desert bathed in moonlight. From somewhere in the distance came the sound of coyotes singing. From closer, the soft nicker of thunder in his corral. From the south, lights from Copper Ridge. From the north, the dark shapes of the Dragoon Mountains, where Napaya's people made their home. Ethan touched the bracelet on his wrist, felt the knife at his hip. Both had become so familiar he barely noticed them anymore. But they were there, always there, reminders of connection, of belonging, of promises kept. He smiled, alone under the stars, but not lonely, not anymore. The years that followed brought changes. Tensions between settlers and Apache continued, waxing and waning with political winds and economic pressures. But in the small area around Copper Ridge, Ethan's influence helped maintain a fragile peace. In 1880, when the government tried to force Napaya's band onto a reservation, Ethan testified on their behalf. His word as a respected member of both communities carried weight. The band was allowed to remain on their traditional lands for 5 more years. In 1882, when a group of young Apache warriors wanted to raid settler ranches in retaliation for broken treaties, Napaya brought them to Ethan. Together they talked the young men down, found alternative solutions, prevented bloodshed on both sides. In 1890, when disease swept through the Apache camp, Ethan rode there with medical supplies and knowledge. He saved dozens of lives, including Keona's 3 sons. He never remarried. People asked, occasionally, suggested he must be lonely, but he wasn't. He had family, just not the conventional kind. Napaya died in 1920 at the age of 82. Ethan was at his bedside, holding his friend's hand as he had once held Sarah's. Napaya's last words were, "Thank you for proving Aaliyah was right. Thank you for being the man she believed existed." Dakota lived until 1946. She was 94 years old when she passed, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had inherited her fierce spirit and her mother's gentle wisdom. Ethan attended her funeral, one of the few white faces in a sea of Apache mourners. But no one questioned his presence. He belonged there. Keona died in 1946 as well, just months after her sister. Ethan was 78 by then, too old to travel to her funeral in the reservation lands where she'd moved. But her sons came to visit him, bringing her medicine bag. She'd left instructions that it should go to Ethan, the man who'd saved her life and changed her family's fate. Now, in 1956, at 88 years old, Ethan stood in his study with his grandson, surrounded by photographs of a life fully lived. "So you see, Daniel," and he said softly, "that night when I opened my door to 2 strangers, when I gave up my bed and my safety to help someone in need, I didn't just save one life, I changed everything. My life, their lives, the lives of everyone in this community." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd heard. Finally, he said, "You took such a risk. You could have died." "I could have," Ethan agreed, "but I was already dead in the ways that mattered. Being alive isn't just about breathing and having a heartbeat. It's about connection, purpose, meaning. For 3 years, I had none of those things. Helping those girls gave me back my life. You said you wanted to tell me this story for a reason. Ethan turned to look at his grandson, really look at him. The young man who'd come back from Korea carrying his own ghosts, his own losses, his own struggle to find meaning in a world that had shown him its cruelest face. I see you, Daniel. I see the same emptiness in your eyes that I carried in mine. You think you're broken. You think the things you saw in Korea, the friends you lost, have damaged you beyond repair. You think the best you can hope for is to survive until the memories fade. I don't know if they'll ever fade, Daniel said quietly. They won't, Ethan said. But that's not the point. The point is that you're at the same crossroads I was at. You can choose to disappear, to isolate yourself, to become a ghost going through the motions. Or you can choose to live, to connect, to help, to be the kind of man who opens his door when strangers need help, even when it costs everything. He placed his hand on Daniel's shoulder. You know what Napaya taught me? That grief can either destroy us or transform us. That we always have a choice, every single day, between hiding from life or embracing it, between isolation and connection. He paused, letting the words sink in. Strong men aren't men who never fall, grandson. They're men who stand back up, who help others stand too. You fell in Korea, but you're still here, still breathing, still capable of choosing what comes next. Daniel's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't know if I can. You can, Ethan said firmly. I know you can, because you're my grandson, because you have the same choice I had, and because I'm here to help you the way Napaya and his family helped me. He walked to his desk and opened a drawer. From it, he pulled 2 items. The bracelet, worn but intact after 80 years, and the knife, its blade still sharp, its handle still solid. These have been with me since that morning in 1876. They've been my companions, my reminders, my promises. Now I want you to have them. Grandpa, I can't. They're too important. They're important because of what they represent. And what they represent is this: you are never alone. You are part of a family that extends beyond blood. You are protected by bonds of honor and love that transcend any single lifetime. He pressed the items into Daniel's palms. Wear the bracelet, carry the knife, and remember, you have a choice every single day. You can choose to live or to merely exist. Choose living, Daniel. Choose helping. Choose being the kind of man who makes the world a little bit better by being in it. Daniel looked down at the bracelet and knife, artifacts from another era, carriers of a legacy he was only beginning to understand. He tied the bracelet around his wrist. He attached the knife to his belt. I'll try it, he said. That's all any of us can do, Ethan replied. Try, fail sometimes, get back up, try again. That's what being alive means. They stood together in the study as the sun set completely, the photographs on the wall bearing witness to a lifetime of choices, of connections, of promises kept. Outside, the desert stretched away into darkness, the same desert where, 80 years ago, a broken man had made a choice that changed everything, where 2 strangers had appeared at a door and found help instead of harm, where 150 warriors had come seeking justice and delivered mercy instead. That desert was still there, still harsh, still beautiful, still full of opportunities for people to choose kindness or cruelty, connection or isolation, life or mere existence. Ethan looked at his grandson wearing the bracelet and carrying the knife, and he saw the future. Not his future, that was behind him now, but the continuation of something that had started with a simple act of kindness on a desperate night. The world needs people who choose to help even when it's hard, Ethan said quietly. Who to see human beings instead of categories. Who act with honor when no one's watching. Be that person, Daniel. Be the kind of man who opens his door when strangers knock. I will, Grandpa, Daniel said. I promise. And in that promise, Ethan heard echoes of another promise made long ago. Sarah's voice in his memory. Don't let grief make you disappear. He'd broken that promise for 3 years, but then he'd kept it for 80 more. And now, through his grandson, it would continue. The legacy wasn't the bracelet or the knife or even the photographs on the wall. The legacy was the choice, the daily decision to live fully, to help freely, to connect courageously. That legacy would outlive them all. As Daniel prepared to leave that evening, he turned back at the door. "Thank you for telling me this story, Grandpa." "Thank you for listening," Ethan replied. "Now go live it." Daniel drove away as the stars came out, the bracelet on his wrist catching the moonlight, the knife solid at his hip, carrying with him not just artifacts, but a responsibility, a promise, a way forward through grief towards something better. Ethan stood on his porch, 88 years old, tired in body but not in spirit. He looked up at the stars, the same stars that had witnessed everything. Sarah's death, his grief, the night two strangers appeared, the dawn when warriors surrounded his cabin, the years of building bridges, the decades of keeping promises. "I kept my promise, Sarah," he whispered to the night. "I didn't disappear. I lived. I helped. I mattered. And now Daniel will carry it forward." The wind picked up, warm despite the late hour, carrying with it the scent of desert sage and memories. 80 years of memories, of two strangers appearing at a door, of 150 warriors at dawn, of a bracelet and a knife that bound worlds together, of a friendship that transcended every divide humans created. Somewhere in that wind, in the rustle of the Palo Verde trees, in the eternal stars watching over both the living and the dead, Ethan felt her. Sarah, Napaya, Dakota, Kiona, all of them, not gone, never gone, living on in the choices that rippled forward through time. He had chosen life over death, connection over isolation, love over fear. And that choice had changed everything.